Good morning. Today we're going to cover some of the basics on a gabled ridge installation. We're going to go over the components and the basics of an install, and we'll cover it more in the field when you're actually hands-on. So earlier you saw how there's many types of skylights. This is probably one of the most popular skylights, gabled ridge. So it's a ridge skylight. It's going one direction or the other, and then has gables on it. Some people call it a double pitch with gables. There's many names, but gabled ridge is the most popular, I would say. So one of the things that's very important when you're in the field is that you call the same part the same thing. Because if you call it that thingamabob and you call it the clip and you call it the cover, you guys are never gonna mesh, right? So that's one of the first things I want everybody to learn. And I'm gonna fast forward here. Let me reduce the control. Here we go. Okay, so these are the parts. So let's kind of cover them. So you have your base. The base is obviously the first thing you're gonna put down. This is your base right here. This sets on your piece of wood, and when you put this down, you're gonna put 2 beads of silicone, 2 continuous beads of silicone. And the reason you do that is because you're putting a hole right here in a screw, and that first bead of silicone keeps the water from coming in and working its way down this hole that you just did. And then as a secondary layer to stop any water from coming inside, you're gonna put a bead of silicone back here in between the wood and the aluminum. All right, so that's your base. Then, kind of skipping around, you're gonna have your rafter. Your rafter looks like this. That's your rafter, and then you have these clips that attach the rafter to the base and to the curb. And then this rafter has, you can't see it here, but you can see the screw. There's an internal clip that is screwed into this ridge tube, and then on your gable ridge design, you have the same thing coming out the other side. So base, clip, rafter, then you have this special component here. This is called a carrier. That would be this one, it's found here and here. This carrier has a gasket area, and then this carrier has a built-in condensate gutter here that catches water. So if water were to get in here, it would run down this little gutter here, condensate gutter, and then would accumulate down here, and it would go out. You can never build a skylight perfectly sealed because it's just too many components. Silicone is great stuff, but after a few years, it's gonna crack, it's gonna weather. So you need to design the inside of your skylight to handle water. One of the best things when you're learning is to, before you put your glass or your glazing on here, take water and pour water down the frame and see how it handles the water. Okay, water needs to flow down, go into the carrier, and flow out. If you have a gap or a weakness someplace, it's going to show up. And that's because when you have a skylight, you're never going to get a leak in the middle of the glass. The leak is going to be around the perimeter, and that's going to go into your frame and into the areas that have been designed to handle water. But those areas have joints. So wherever there's a joint, that's a weakness. So typically you're gonna put silicone in there. The silicone will last a lot longer on the inside because it's not getting hit by the weather. So your first skylight, that's exactly what you wanna do. You wanna pour water in the frame and see what's happening. Water doesn't lie. Water is not a friend to any skylight guy or any roofer or anybody. Water will tell you what's going on very quickly. Okay, so components. Base, we talked about, rafter, carrier. This is your ridge tube, and the ridge tube has an applied system on here, an applied intermediate, and then you have your closure pieces. your closure pieces. So basically you install your frame, and we'll look at that, and the base and the rafter, and then you're gonna set your glazing, and then you're gonna install your closure pieces. Typically, you're gonna put your retainer, which is this piece right here along the edge, and then you're gonna put your ridge flashing up here, and then you're gonna put a pressure bar. This is your pressure bar. This is missing some of the components. There's 2 gaskets here, and this pressure bar, where's this little sample? This pressure bar has screws in it. The screw has a washer with a layer of rubber that basically seals it. It has a gasket, and this squeezes your glass. And this little piece of wood here represents your imaginary glass. So it squeezes it. So now you have a pretty tight seal here. You have this ridge piece, and then this retainer that has a layer of silicone underneath it when you press it down. And then you'll put a beauty cap on top to make it look
beautiful.
Beautiful. Thank you. And then you need a few screws and little end caps and so forth to finish it off. But that is the basic design. But what's important for new people is to learn these basic names. So you can see it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 main components. So it's not a lot of pieces and parts. Okay, let's kind of dive into. All right, so I'll build this very quickly. Okay, when you have your curve on a structural skylight, it's a little bit different. It's gonna be different than a piece of wood standing on edge, because this is a lot thicker and it's structural. So you need a very strong curve or you're gonna get problems. So basically you're gonna get, the wood's gonna be laying flat. It's gonna be built very similar to a wall. So you're gonna get typically a double top plate, 2 pieces of wood, and then some sort of wall underneath to raise it up off the wood. So this is showing how it's beneficial to have your curve, lay your base on it, kind of draw a line so you could see where you need to put your beads of silicone. And now you do a double bead of silicone, set your frame on it, and then you're gonna, so now you have your base on there. It's masterfully sealed to that curve. Now you're really comfortable that you're not gonna get a leak on that curve, because that's the number 1 most susceptible area to get a leak. And now you're gonna build your spider. Most jobs, this is what we call the spider. So it's basically the ridge tube and the rafters. In most jobs, they're relatively small, that can be handled by 3 or 4 guys. In some jobs, we're doing a job right now where this rafter tube is longer than 20 feet. I want to say it's 28 feet. So it's in 2 pieces. So it's susceptible to bending and that type of force. So we're building a very basic lightweight spider and then finishing the assembly in the position. But what I'm getting at is most spiders can be built next to the skylight if there's room, and then you get 4 guys and you basically drop it in place. It makes life a lot easier, and you know, and it's quicker. So that's the general preferred way. Doesn't always work out because some skylights are way bigger. Okay, one of the important things is when you're assembling that spider is that this lines up with this. Now, once you do one, you'll understand what I'm saying. So you have a gasket on this intermediate, this part of your ridge tube, and then you have a gasket on your rafter, and then there's a little bit of play in this rafter. So you have to drill some holes right here that are really not shown, but the important thing is that this lines out and it's in plane. And you guys have probably gone through some of that.
Oh, yeah,
and in the next couple days, you guys will be in the field and you'll see that. Okay, when you set your spider, one of the things that needs to be set, and can be kind of a pain because you have to kind of work it in, is your carriers. Okay, you have to fight with them, you have to persuade them with a mallet, but it's very, very important that you get that in the right spot. And the right spot is, there's two issues. You need to get this and this part of the carrier in the slot, and the most important is you have, I call it a tongue, this little tongue right here, not the one on the outside, the one in the middle or on the inside. It has to fall in this U groove, and you can see it right here. So it has to sit there, and sometimes you need to play with it. Sometimes you have to pick up the spider to make it fall in place. Sometimes the shop makes it a little bit tighter than what we prefer, and it's just a bit of a chore to get it to line up.
That carrier goes like after you installed the Rafter?
It kind of almost at the same time.
Same time, okay.
You kind of have to play with it,
Yeah.
right?
Right, yeah. Yeah, you put the spider frame in completed with all the rafters, and then
The carriers.
you put the carrier in after that, yeah. That, before anything's bolted down, so you can move it.
Yeah, sometimes you have to pick up the
Drive it.
rafters.
Yeah.
Okay, now this illustration is not perfect, but once you do it, you'll understand what's happening here. On the end, okay, this rafter, because on this is a gabled ridge, there's a piece of glass here. So when your base wraps around, there's a gap here about 1.25 inches, and there's an angle on the inside that's not readily seen on this graphic, but the face of this rafter has to line up with the face of this angle. So that's kind of an important part that I think you can see it pretty well here. Again, when you actually see the skylight, you'll see what we're talking about. Okay, once you get everything lined up, now you can start putting your screws, your lags. You have to pre-drill the hole. You should shoot silicone into that hole. In case water gets into the curb, by having silicone there, you're not gonna have that area rot out. So you shoot silicone, maybe 3 pumps of your gun, and then once you drive this in, you're gonna have wood chips and aluminum chips. Clean them out and put a dollop of silicone on there to seal it. Once you do that and you get it in place, now when you screw your lags down, drill and screw, you have to be cognizant of your glass sizes. You have to make sure that this thing is you know, you have 90-degree angles, so you have to be really aware of that. You have to check your dimensioning. So that's before you screw it down. That's when you check it, you adjust it, you make sure your glass fits or your glazing fits, and then you attach it. When you do attach it, you've already done this, but you need to run a screw through here. This locks this piece in here. I think it's a number 10 by 1.5. You do that, okay, and then your carriers are meant to handle water, so your carriers need end dams. So an end dam is made with silicone. So you kind of make your end dams. And then also, if that carrier is spliced, you want to silicone it very well. Okay, now you're getting ready to put your gaskets. So you make sure your gaskets are on there. The funny thing about gaskets, and again, you're gonna see it when you actually go to install it, you can't stretch the gasket. You have to compress it and push it in place, because if you stretch it and you cut it, over time it'll shrink and leave gaps in the corners.
And by over time, like days.
Yeah, and now you have bees coming in, wind, you know, air blowing through, so it's. So now you've put your gaskets. Now you're getting ready to set your glass, so you have to continue to prepare. On the downhill side, you're gonna put setting blocks. You're gonna put a little bead of silicone, and you're gonna put at least 2 setting blocks, so that when the glass is sitting, you can see them here, when the glass is sitting, it's not touching metal, because that setting block will allow it to carry the weight of your glass. It's not so critical if the skylight was like this. You're still gonna put them, but if your skylight was like this, it's like pretty much all the weight is resting there, and you wanna make sure you have a nice soft piece of rubber.
It's a rubber material?
Yes.
Okay, okay.
Yeah. You can see what it looks like. Sometimes this rubber, this setting block is a little bit taller than your glass, so you might need to take a knife and slice it down. And you can just rest your blade on here, you know, like a utility knife, and just slice it off. Not a big deal there. Okay, also, not really shown here, but you're gonna have a layer of insulation right here. So basically you test fit it, make sure it works, make sure you don't need to trim it, and then kind of do a bead of silicone and stick your insulation in there. Now, that insulation comes in two colors, black and white. The black one goes very well with your bronze skylights. It goes very well with this dark bronze. The white one does not always go great with your clear anodized. I've had customers in the past ask us to paint that with the silver paint that we use for touch-up. So heads up, that might be an issue. It might not be a problem. Sometimes you can see it from below, sometimes you can't. Okay, now you're gonna review your frame. You're at the point where you're ready to set glass. You've installed your foam tape so your gable glass can sit there. You've put all your gaskets, you didn't stretch them, you've got all your setting blocks, you have all your parts, you're ready to go. Now you gave it your double check. Here's your double check checklist. You did your end dams, you wiped down the frame. It's easy to clean the frame now, but now when you put glass, now you gotta get a ladder and go from inside. It's a lot harder. So now you have to worry about your glass. So some of the things on here we've covered before. We're just gonna talk about glass right now. Polycarbonate, you need to have the writing on top. You need the proper tapes to close off the cells, but that's for another day. So now we're gonna set your glass, okay? This illustration is showing glass is reasonable in size. So 2 foot by 3 foot, 4 by 4, you can handle it. You're gonna have manual power cups that you pump up, and you can carry glass pretty easy. You're gonna see the breather tube. Generally, the breather tube is gonna go on the higher side, either up here or here. The reason you put it up on the higher side, because this is generally gonna be drier, and if you have a hole in your silicone, you might have water that accumulates down here and then sits for a while, and that will work its way into your breather tube. So make sure your breather tube is on top, make sure your piece of glass is in the right orientation. Bring your glass down, set it on the setting blocks, lay it down carefully, set it in place, and pinch your breather tube. You can pinch your breather tube ahead of time. I would suggest you do that. And you basically crimp it 3 times, cut the end. That basically closes off that little tube, and then you put a dab of silicone on the end. So anyways, you set your glass. Before you set your glass, on every corner, you have the splices where the gaskets meet each other. They're not splices, you have joints where the gaskets meet each other. And there's always small gaps. Even if you compress your gasket in there, maybe you didn't cut it perfectly square, so you have an area where air and water can get in. So you put a dab of silicone there, a dab here, and a dab there, and then you lay your glass down. Okay, now you've got your glass set down. Now you need to install your retainer. There's a couple ways to do the retainer, but we'll discuss the basic way. Basically, you run a bead of silicone here, you put your retainer on here, and then you put some screws in here. You don't want to tighten these screws because they'll deform it, and they'll cause the retainer to lift up here and be an area for water to catch. So now you've installed your retainer. Now you have, basically what you're doing now is closing it up, making it watertight, and you have to think very much like a roofer. So what does a roofer do? He basically starts from the bottom up, because the bottom layer, then the next layer, and then the next layer, so everything's on top, so water sheds. So you start with the lower part, and then your next piece is gonna be your side flashing. Before you can do the side flashing, you have different scenarios going on here, depending on your glass thickness. Typically, you're gonna need a wood block, a continuous wood block, this thing right here, and that is to fill the gap. A lot of times you have custom sized pieces of glass. So you have this here, and that allows you to put a flashing over it, like so, and it's all in the same plane. So basically you install your wood block, you install your glass, and now you come with your flashing, and your helper is gonna be good to have at this point, an extra set of hands is what I'm trying to say, because you have a lot of things going on here. So now you've installed your glass, you've installed your wood block, now you're gonna install your flashing. It's beneficial if you can pre-cut these parts before you get into your silicone, because it can be messy trying to hold it and cut it, and you got silicone going on. So basically, you install your side flashing, okay? And there's a couple ways to do that as well. So now, and then often if you're limited in crew size, some tape is handy. So these are generally screwed. These generally are held in place by your hands, or you can put tape. Now you're gonna put your ridge flashing in there. Same deal, same thing you did here. You're gonna run a bead of silicone, you're gonna lay it in there. And now you're gonna put your pressure bars that squeeze everything tight. When you do your pressure bar, be extremely careful, because when you're putting the screws that go here, it's very easy to run the screw in the wrong spot. So if you run it in the wrong spot, you broke the piece of glass. So generally what I do when I do this, I'll put the top one and I'll kind of do it by hand and make sure you can kind of peek through a little bit, lift it up a little bit, get the top started, and I'll do the same at the bottom. Now that I know both ends are lined up in with the screw going in the screw box, now I feel safe to run the other screws in with my impact. So again, very problematic. Okay, now you got your pressure bar, it's looking good. Now you can put your beauty caps, install your beauty caps. They're pretty straightforward, unless they're not pre-cut for your job. So if you need to cut them, well, you need to get your chop saw up on the roof. Once they're installed properly, you're gonna put an end cap, slide it in there, put a screw in there like you see here, and that finishes it off so the customer sees a nice, beautiful skylight. Now that you've installed it, you need to do some additional siliconing. Typically, your additional silicone involves silicone right here where these beauty caps meet. You want to put silicone, and actually you want to do it underneath so it's protected from the sun. There, you want to run a bead of silicone about 6 inches up, because where this gasket jumps over this retainer, there's a little slight gap there. So you run silicone right there up to here, that takes care of that. There's also a gap right here where the gasket jumps over this ridge flashing. You want to do a bead of silicone like so. If it's an area where it's hard to get to, or it's down in Utah, you don't want to go back there, I would run a full length bead of silicone and do a full wet seal, because it's going to be bulletproof. So anyways, you do the apex, you do the sill area, you do the head area, you do your gable ends, and then you do your sill. And then I would look around, what did I forget? Did I get good silicone coverage here? I would personally do a small bead of silicone right here, because your water is running down and it's gonna hit here. I would make sure that this is very well silicone. Here it's not that much of a problem, because water's gonna do this, right? Unless you have a skylight that's flat. A lot of architects like flat skylights. I don't know why, okay? They just are not thinking about maintenance, because a flat skylight will always be dirty, because once it gets water, it's all the dirt that's in the atmosphere, pollution is basically gonna sit on there, and that water is gonna evaporate and you're gonna have a lot of dirt. But I don't like it, but a lot of times architects do that. It's kind of crazy, but anyways, give it a good look. You're gonna see a skylight is not a rocket ship. You're gonna think like water. Water's gonna come in here. Where's it gonna go? Let me seal it. So those are the basic spots that you wanna seal. Now, when you run a bead of silicone, okay, you must tool it. Fernando, you know what tooling means? What is it?
Usually you finish, it means pretty much finishing whatever product you put down. You tool it, make it
Tool it
smooth,
with-
finish.
You can use your finger.
Yeah.
You can use a silicone spoon. You can go to the brake truck and get a spoon. It means pushing the silicone into the gaps, okay? If you don't tool your silicone, you are not doing it right. You gotta tool it everywhere unless it's underneath the retainer where the retainer squashes it into the glass. Any place that's exposed, you need to tool it. Now, some of you might not be pros at siliconing. I myself am not that great. So what I do is I put a piece of tape, I silicone it, I run my finger or my metal spatula, then I peel the tape and it looks beautiful, okay? Some of our guys that have been doing silicone for a long time, they could do it with a silicone, with a caulking gun, and they can come with a tool, silicone spatula, and it looks better than what I can do with tape. So it's all different levels of skill, but initially, run two pieces of tape. Not a big deal. It's gonna be quick because you're gonna peel it off, you're done. So it's gonna take a little while to tape it all up, and then just silicone it. It'll come out a lot better. Especially if it's a rooftop deck or there's a balcony right there. You wanna do a nice job. And that pretty much covers the very basic on a small skylight. There's other considerations. If it's big, you have splices. If you have a lot of rafters, it's just a lot of rafters. So, you've been working recently on this type of skylight. Is there anything that I missed?
A couple little details. I know from what I've seen, you know, I'm sure different people do it differently, but whenever you put the base down, they go through and they just tack it in, measure it out, tack it in, and then set the spider frame in so that nothing moves.
Good point. It's in these instructions. Yeah, you put some wood screws or something to hold it in place so you don't get surprises.
Yeah.
Okay, anything else? All right, thank you very much.